In medieval northern France, onion tarts were not seen as a special dish or a regional delicacy. They were simply there. They appeared on rough wooden tables in peasant homes, in the quiet kitchens of monasteries, and wrapped in cloth in the hands of workers walking through market streets. People did not prepare them to impress others or to celebrate important events. They baked them because they needed food that could be made easily, eaten by anyone, and relied on ingredients that were always available. Over time, this plain and practical dish became deeply tied to everyday life in the region. The land itself shaped what people ate. Northern France had a cool climate, frequent rain, and heavy soil that was often worn out from constant farming. These conditions made growing many crops uncertain. Wheat often failed, especially in poor years, and vegetables that needed warmth or careful attention were risky for families who lived close to hunger. Onions, however, behaved differently. They grew well in damp soil, tolerated cold temperatures, and did not demand constant care. Even small plots behind houses or within monastery walls could produce a reliable onion harvest. This dependability made onions extremely important. In a world without safety nets, a crop that usually survived bad weather meant stability. Onions spread across rural gardens, town plots, and religious lands because they simply worked. They did not require special tools or large fields. Families could harvest them over time rather than all at once. As a result, onions entered daily cooking not because people preferred them, but because they were always there. When onion tarts became common, they reflected this reality. People cooked what they had, and what they had most reliably were onions. Cooking transformed onions in ways few other vegetables could match. Slow heat brought out their sweetness, turning a sharp raw bulb into something warm and comforting. When placed on simple dough, onions could turn basic ingredients into a filling meal. In this way, onion tarts were shaped directly by geography. They were not invented by chefs, but formed naturally where land, climate, and survival needs met. Winter made these needs even clearer. From late autumn until spring, fresh food nearly vanished. People relied on what they could store safely without spoilage. Onions were especially valuable because of how well they kept. Once harvested and dried, they could last for months in cellars, barns, or hanging from beams inside homes. They did not need salt like meat or sugar like fruit. Their natural structure protected them through cold and darkness. Because of this, onions became a central part of winter meals. When other vegetables disappeared, onions remained. They offered flavor, warmth, and a sense of continuity during long months of scarcity. Meals with onions felt more complete and familiar even when options were limited. Onion tarts fit perfectly into this pattern. Flour could also be stored for long periods, and combining flour and onions allowed families to keep eating filling food well into winter. Fuel was precious. Baking often happened only occasionally, so foods that could be baked once and eaten over several days were ideal. Onion tarts met this need. They were not just something to eat. They were a plan, a way to stretch supplies and energy until warmer seasons returned. In this sense, onion tarts were closely tied to survival, shaped by the demands of winter and the need to endure it. In medieval villages and growing towns across northern France, private ovens were rare. Most families did not have the space, fuel, or resources to maintain one of their own. Instead, baking was organized around large communal ovens that belonged to the village, the lord, or the monastery. These ovens were the center of food production and were used only on certain days, according to strict rules and schedules. Everyone depended on them, which meant every moment of heat mattered. Baking was never casual. It was planned, shared, and carefully managed. On baking days, bread always came first. Bread was the backbone of survival, eaten at nearly every meal by people of all ages and social levels. Families prepared their dough in advance, mixing large quantities early in the day. Once the oven reached the right temperature, loaves were shaped quickly and placed inside one after another. Timing was critical. The oven cooled gradually, and wasting heat meant wasting food. Efficiency was not a choice. It was a requirement. Within this tightly controlled system, onion tarts fit perfectly. After shaping loaves, there were almost always small pieces of dough left behind. These scraps were too precious to throw away, yet often too small to form proper bread. Rather than discard them, people flattened the dough into thin rounds. Onions, already prepared for other meals, were scattered on top. With almost no extra effort, something new was created from what would otherwise have been lost. The thinness of onion tarts was essential. Unlike thick loaves, they did not need intense heat or long baking times. They could be placed into the oven after bread, when the temperature had already begun to fall. In this way, they made use of heat that would otherwise go unused. No extra firewood was needed. No second baking day was required. Onion tarts were born from this careful use of shared resources, shaped directly by the limits of communal life. The structure of communal ovens also encouraged flat foods. Flat items were easier to handle, quicker to bake, and simpler to remove without disturbing other bread inside. They could be stacked on wooden boards and slid into place with minimal space. Onion tarts required no special trays, molds, or tools. They worked with the oven exactly as it was. Over time, this practicality turned into habit. Baking day meant bread, and alongside it, onion tarts almost automatically. What started as an improvised solution slowly became expected. People planned for onion tarts. They saved onions for baking day. Children recognized them as part of the rhythm of village life. The tart was no longer an accident. It became an understood part of how communities used their ovens, their time, and their heat. Religion added another powerful layer to this pattern. The Christian calendar governed medieval life as strongly as seasons or labor. Fasting and abstinence days were frequent, sometimes filling nearly half the week. On these days, eating meat was forbidden. These rules applied not only to monks and nuns, but to ordinary people as well. For families already living close to hunger, this posed a constant challenge. Meat was one of the most filling foods available, yet it was often restricted. People needed alternatives that could still support long days of work. Onion tarts offered exactly that. Made from grain and vegetables, they followed religious rules while still providing substance. When fasting rules were less strict, people added dairy products like cheese, milk, or eggs. When rules were stricter, onions and dough alone were enough. This flexibility mattered. The same basic dish could be adjusted without changing its identity. It could appear on fasting days, ordinary days, and even religious seasons without conflict. Importantly, onion tarts did not feel like a sacrifice. Slowly cooked onions developed sweetness and depth, masking the absence of meat. Meals remained satisfying even when restrictions were in place. Over time, faith shaped taste. What people learned to enjoy was influenced by what they were allowed to eat. Onion-based dishes became familiar, comforting, and normal. The rules of belief quietly guided everyday preference, embedding onion tarts deeper into daily life without anyone consciously choosing them as a symbol of religion. Economics reinforced this bond. In medieval households, food was judged by its ability to sustain labor, not by appearance or refinement. Northern France depended on hard physical work, farming, building, craft labor, and long hours outdoors. Meals had to deliver energy at the lowest possible cost. Onion tarts did this exceptionally well. Onions were cheap and widely available. Many families grew them themselves. Flour, once milled, could be stretched across multiple meals. Together, these ingredients created food that filled stomachs without draining limited resources. No rare ingredients were needed. No market purchases were required. The value of the onion tart lay in its reliability. The structure of the tart added to its usefulness. Dough provided carbohydrates, while onions added fiber and substance. This combination slowed hunger and extended energy. Unlike thin broths or watery porridges, onion tarts felt solid. A single portion could replace several lighter meals. For large families or households with limited supplies, this mattered deeply. Meat was expensive and unpredictable. Cheese depended on livestock health. Spices were unreachable for most people. Onion tarts required none of these. Their flavor came from patience rather than wealth. Slow cooking transformed simple ingredients into something deeply satisfying. In this way, the onion tart became a quiet symbol of medieval thrift. It was never designed to impress. It did not announce status or celebration. Its purpose was endurance. It fed people steadily, day after day, within the limits of faith, economy, and shared infrastructure. That is why it spread so widely. It solved many problems at once, without asking for anything extra in return. One of the greatest strengths of the onion tart was its ability to change without losing itself. At its heart, the dish remained simple, dough and onions, yet everything around that core could shift depending on place, season, and circumstance. This made the onion tart resilient in a world where stability was rare. It did not depend on fixed ingredients or strict rules. Instead, it accepted what was available and adjusted quietly, becoming whatever people needed it to be at that moment. In regions where dairy farming was strong, onion tarts became richer. Cheese was added when possible, melting into the onions and dough to create a more nourishing meal. Milk or eggs sometimes softened the filling, increasing both calories and comfort. These additions were not about luxury. They were practical improvements made when resources allowed. Where dairy was scarce, the tart returned to its plain form without complaint, losing nothing of its purpose. Households with small herb gardens added flavor in their own ways. Thyme, parsley, or chives were scattered lightly over the onions, not to impress, but to deepen taste using what grew close to home. Herbs cost nothing but care and time. They turned the familiar into something slightly new while remaining grounded in everyday life. Even these small changes made the dish feel personal, tied to a specific home or village. When scraps of bacon or a spoonful of lard were available, the tart became heavier and more filling. These were not common additions, but when they appeared, they mattered. A small amount of fat transformed the dish, making it better suited for long days of labor. Yet the tart did not depend on these extras. Their absence never stopped it from being made. This independence was key to its survival. Because of this flexibility, onion tarts appeared in many forms across northern France. Poor families prepared plain versions, relying only on onions and dough. Wealthier town households enjoyed richer variations, sometimes layered with cheese or herbs. Monasteries adjusted ingredients carefully to match religious rules, shifting between dairy and non-dairy forms depending on the calendar. There was no single correct version. Each reflected the limits and resources of its maker. This lack of a fixed recipe gave the onion tart strength. It was not preserved by tradition alone, but by usefulness. When harvests failed, it simplified itself. When markets expanded, it absorbed new ingredients. When tastes changed, it adjusted without resistance. It did not need protection from change because change was built into it. That is why it lasted when other dishes faded away. Daily life in medieval northern France demanded food that worked alongside labor rather than interrupting it. People rose early and worked until light faded. Meals were not events, they were pauses, brief and necessary. Food needed to be reliable, portable, and easy to eat. Onion tarts matched this rhythm perfectly, fitting into working lives without demanding attention. Once baked, onion tarts required no further preparation. They could be eaten hot from the oven, warm hours later, or cold the next day. Their value did not depend on freshness or presentation. Workers wrapped them in cloth and carried them to fields, workshops, or building sites. They traveled well and survived handling without falling apart. The solid structure of the tart mattered. Unlike soups or porridges, it did not require bowls or spoons. It could be eaten by hand during short breaks, standing or sitting on the ground. This made it ideal for laborers who could not afford long pauses. The tart did not slow work. It supported it, offering steady energy without distraction. Fuel scarcity reinforced this pattern. Firewood was expensive, and cooking every day was not always possible. Baking in large batches made sense. A single baking session could produce enough onion tarts to last several days. This reduced the need for constant cooking and conserved precious fuel. In this way, the tart aligned with both time and resource limits. As northern French towns grew, food habits shifted again. Urban life brought crowded populations who depended less on home cooking and more on purchased food. Bakers became central figures, producing not only bread but simple meals ready to eat. The onion tart fit easily into this new environment. Sold from bakeries and market stalls, onion tarts became early street food. They were affordable, filling, and familiar. Laborers, apprentices, and travelers could buy one and eat it immediately without reheating or preparation. This speed mattered in cities where time was tightly measured and movement constant. Onion tarts spoiled slowly and wasted little. Their ingredients were stable, and their structure protected them. This reduced loss for both bakers and buyers. In crowded markets filled with uncertainty, familiar food offered reassurance. The taste of onions and bread reminded people of home, even in unfamiliar streets. Cities favored foods that balanced nourishment and convenience. Onion tarts delivered both. They were produced using existing ovens, sold throughout the day, and eaten without ceremony. What began as a rural solution adapted smoothly to urban life, proving its versatility once again. The onion tart did not change its purpose as it moved from countryside to city. It remained food designed to sustain effort. Its form shifted slightly, its audience expanded, but its role stayed the same. This consistency across environments helped it endure across generations. In this way, the onion tart became more than a dish. It became a pattern of adaptation. Wherever people needed reliable food shaped by circumstance, it appeared. It survived because it listened to the world around it, responding quietly without demanding more than could be given. When a food becomes common enough, it stops being noticed and starts being remembered. In northern France, onion tarts were eaten so often that they became part of everyday identity. Children learned their smell before they learned words for recipes. Knowledge passed through repetition, not writing. People watched, helped, and remembered. Over generations, this repetition created tradition. Villages developed preferred methods. Towns added local touches. Monasteries refined their own styles. What once answered hunger slowly became a marker of place. Onion tarts reminded people of home and continuity, yet practicality never disappeared. The tart stayed simple because its purpose stayed the same. It fed people efficiently. Its meaning deepened, but its function remained. In this way, necessity and memory merged. Onion tarts were never meant to represent wealth or creativity. They existed to solve problems: cold winters, religious rules, limited resources, and exhausting labor. Within these limits, they achieved balance. They respected land, belief, and effort. Medieval life favored endurance over excess. Onion tarts did not resist their environment. They worked with it. They took what the land offered and transformed it with patience and heat. Their story is not one of luxury, but of quiet resilience. Today, onion tarts are often romanticized, but their roots remain practical. They remind us that culture is often built through repeated, humble choices. Northern France baked its history not in feasts, but in everyday meals that kept people alive.